Every detail in this classical work was intentional, carefully planned, and emotionally charged. All from the smallest gesture to the boldest contrast, everything tells a deeper story waiting to be heard. Welcome to Museum Mysteries.
There are images that do not need blood to speak of horror. Images that do not show violence, but make it felt more deeply than any scene of battle. The Massacre of the Innocents by Leon Cogniet is one of them. A painting that does not narrate the event, but the echo of the event. It does not show the murder, but the silence that remains afterward. Painted in the year 1824, this work is one of the most overwhelming interpretations of the biblical episode known as the Massacre of the Innocents, narrated in the Gospel of Matthew. According to the sacred text, King Herod, fearing the arrival of the Messiah announced by the Magi, ordered the execution of all male children under 2 years old in Bethlehem. It was an act of paranoia and power, a desperate attempt to stop the inevitable, the birth of hope. Léon Cogniet, a young French artist trained at the prestigious École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, chose to represent that passage not from the grandeur of history, but from the intimacy of a hidden mother. Instead of crowds or soldiers, we see only a woman crouched in a corner, embracing her child, sleeping or perhaps dead. Her gaze is fixed yet empty. Her body is still yet tense. The entire painting is immersed in absolute, almost unbearable silence. Cogniet's genius lies not in what he shows, but in what he conceals. There is no blood, no screams, no movement, only a shadow that envelops the scene like an open tomb. It is fear in its purest state, fear without sound. This choice was radical for its time. While other romantic painters chose epic scenes, Cogniet chose emptiness, while Delacroix exalted liberty in flames, and Géricault the horror of bodies, Cogniet whispered the silent pain of a mother. That anonymous mother became one of the most powerful figures in 19th century art. Her pale face, barely illuminated by the faint light entering from the left, seems suspended between crying and resignation. There is no hope, yet no surrender either. It is the universal portrait of human fear before loss. It is said that Léon Cogniet painted this work after visiting Italy and studying the compositions of the great Baroque masters. But what inspired him was not technique. It was emotion. In Rome he had seen frescoes of martyrs and mothers mourning their children, and he understood that the real drama was not in the act of murder but in the waiting before it. Thus was born his version of the Massacre of the Innocents, a work where the invisible weighs more than the visible. With this painting, Cogniet defied his time. In a France beginning to rebuild itself after the Napoleonic Wars, the image of a mother hiding from power also became a political metaphor. Some critics saw in it a silent denunciation of state abuse and the repression of the masses. Not everyone understood it. Some called it too silent, too intimate, lacking in action. But posterity proved him right. The most intense action can occur in stillness. The composition is as simple as it is devastating. The dark space suggests a closed room, perhaps a basement or an abandoned house. The mother leans against the wall, holding her child tightly to her chest. In the background, a red stain seems to hint at the presence of danger. Some scholars interpret that shadow as a symbol of Herod's murderous power, others as the invisible thread of evil that runs through human history. But there is an almost imperceptible detail that changes the entire reading: the child's hand. Though he appears asleep, his small arm hangs lifeless. There is no movement, no life. Cogniet did not need to show death, only to suggest it. And that suggestion hurts more than any evidence. The painting was presented at the Paris Salon of 1824, and although it did not receive the immediate recognition of other works that year, such as those by Delacroix or Ingres, it eventually became a reference for modern sensibility. Many saw it as a precursor to a new form of empathy in art, not the empathy of spectacle, but of shared silence. It is said that Cogniet never spoke openly about the meaning of his work. Some believe it represented something more personal. His younger sister had died shortly before, and the artist was deeply affected. It is possible that this anonymous mother is not just a biblical figure, but a symbol of Cogniet's own personal loss. Throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, the work was interpreted in many ways. Some read it as a feminist cry, ahead of its time. The mother turned into silent resistance. Others, as a political allegory of power, crushing innocence. And in modern times, it has been seen as a universal image of civilian suffering during war, where the victims are always the same, the innocent. No major restorations are known in the history of this work, but there is one curious episode. During its conservation at the Museum of Fine Arts in Nantes, restorers noticed that the upper layer of dark pigment had altered over time, making the scene even gloomier. That accidental darkness heightened the original drama, turning the painting almost spectral. Infrared studies revealed that Cogniet had originally sketched two more figures, another mother in the background and a soldier in shadow. But he erased them. He decided that one figure was enough to speak for all. It was an act of absolute genius, removing the noise to leave the soul bare. In that solitude lies the painting's power. Silence is stronger than the scream, fear more eloquent than heroism. And in the face of that anonymous mother, Léon Cogniet left the eternal portrait of all invisible victims of history. At first glance, Cogniet's scene seems like a simple domestic moment frozen in time, but the longer you look, the more you feel that this room holds more than fear. It is a capsule of the human soul, a space where pain becomes silence, and silence becomes revelation. The mother's eyes do not look at the viewer, they look inward, and that inward gaze turns the painting into a mirror. We do not see only a hidden mother, we see ourselves. When fear forces us to be silent, when hope becomes a threat, when love turns into both refuge and prison. The contrast between light and shadow is one of Cogniet's most powerful tools. The light entering from an invisible crack does not fully illuminate the face. It only brushes her cheek, creating a line that divides the painting into two dimensions. The outer one, where danger lives, and the inner one, where faith hides. That dim light is not natural but symbolic. It represents the spark of humanity that survives amid barbarism. Some art historians suggest that Cogniet was inspired by Caravaggio's chiaroscuro tradition, but in his case, the chiaroscuro is not merely visual, it is spiritual. The shadow that fills the room is not mere darkness, it is the weight of history. It is the silence of thousands of extinguished voices. It is the invisible wall separating the living from the dead. And in the middle of that shadow, a mother who does not scream, but whose silence cries louder than any word. The choice to show her back against the wall also has a psychological reading. The corner as a symbol of the limit, the space where there is no escape. In the iconography of fear, the corner is the soul's final refuge before the abyss. The mother's body is covered with a veil of earth-colored fabric, almost blending with the background. That neutral color merges her with the space, as if her identity dissolved into the shadow. It is a visual expression of trauma's depersonalization. In moments of terror, humans lose their sense of self and merge with their surroundings, seeking invisibility to survive. Cogniet understood this intuitively. His woman does not move, does not breathe, does not differ from the wall. Yet within that stillness lies latent strength, a silent resistance. The child, barely visible, represents the future trying to hide from the present. His small body has no visual weight, yet his presence fills everything. The painting is organized around him, as if the universe revolved around that life suspended between sleep and death. In the Gospels, Herod's massacre is an attempt to destroy the possibility of salvation. In Cogniet's painting, the child embodies that same possibility, the faith in what is yet to be born, the hope that power tries to extinguish before its time. Many modern critics have read this work as an allegory of innocent sacrifice in human history. It is not just about the biblical episode, but about the eternal cycle in which the most vulnerable pay for the ambitions of the powerful. That is why the painting still resonates today. It is a mirror that changes with each era but never with its message. Wars, exiles, persecutions, displacements, every generation repeats the same scene. a hidden mother, a child in danger, and an invisible power advancing from the shadows. In the 20th century, as images of the Holocaust and world wars filled collective consciousness, some art historians rediscovered the massacre of the innocents and deemed it prophetic. Its emotional minimalism anticipates the visual language of modern suffering. It is no coincidence that later artists like Katha Kulwitz, Francisco Goya, or even Picasso in Guernica shared with Cogniet the same idea, not to show violence, but its trace. Cogniet's mother is the prefiguration of all mothers who weep amid the ruins of the 20th century. There is a symbolic detail few observers notice: the wall. It seems merely a dark background, but its texture, its cracks, and the way it absorbs light create the sensation of a frontier between worlds. It is a wall of stone, yet also a mental wall. It represents the confinement of the soul, the prison of fear, the invisible border between life and death. In mystical tradition, the wall symbolizes God's silence before human suffering. Cogniet, whether unknowingly or too knowingly, painted that eternal question: why does divinity remain silent when the innocent die? The mother's gesture, her bowed head and crossed arms over the child, also evokes the iconography of the Pietà. It is not coincidence. Cogniet converses with centuries of Christian art where the mother witnesses her son's sacrifice. But here there is no sanctity, no glory, only fear. The mother is not Mary, she is every woman. She is humanity itself trying to protect its inner light from outer darkness, and within that gesture lies a universal truth. Fragility is the purest form of strength. For a long time, this painting was viewed as a work of religious sorrow, but in recent decades, gender studies and psychological readings have revealed new dimensions. Some analysts interpret it as a critique of the invisibility of female suffering. In Western art, women were for centuries muses or martyrs, but rarely silent witnesses of horror. Cogniet breaks that pattern. He gives the mother not a decorative role, but a central one. She does not act, but she feels everything, and that absolute feeling makes her the moral axis of the painting. In modern psychology, the mother's silence can be seen as a reflection of trauma. When pain is too great, the mind shuts down. The painting captures that suspended instant when emotion freezes and the body paralyzes to survive. It is the moment when life endures by instinct alone. So although the scene seems static, it is charged with inner energy, a contained emotional volcano. If you look closely, you will notice the painting lacks a horizon. There is no exit, no door, no path. Cogniet eliminated all visual escape to intensify the sense of confinement. It was a bold compositional choice, breaking with the academic tradition of scenic depth. Here the space flattens, becoming a visual coffin. That lack of horizon is symbolically the absence of hope. Yet it can also be read as an invitation to the viewer. It is we who must open the horizon with our gaze, with our compassion. In his era, this painting did not cause public scandal, but did provoke deep bewilderment among critics. Some considered it too dark for the neoclassical taste of the Salon. They could not understand why a young, talented artist would paint such a silent scene, devoid of action or heroes. Yet that mistake was precisely its greatness. Cogniet was ahead of his time. He anticipated the sensitivity of symbolism and existentialist vision, the idea that art should not show but suggest. Later, when the artist devoted himself to teaching, he influenced an entire generation of painters who learned from him the primacy of soul over technique. Among his students were names later recognized in 19th century French art, and many confessed that the massacre of the innocents was the painting that made them realize that art needs no noise to move the spirit. There is a little-known anecdote. It is said that Cogniet would visit his studio at night, alone, to observe his own work by candlelight. A close friend, the critic Théophile Gautier, wrote years later that one night he found him staring at the painting and murmuring, "The real tragedy is not in the dead, but in those left alive to remember them." That phrase, filled with melancholy, sums up the entire essence of the painting. Time turned this work into a symbol beyond religion. Today it is exhibited as a universal representation of human pain, but also of dignity. Cogniate's mother does not scream, does not surrender, does not beg, she endures. And that quiet endurance is what makes her eternal. She represents all mothers of all times, from those of Bethlehem to those of modern wars. The dark color of the surroundings is not just an aesthetic choice, but a reflection of the world's collective darkness. Every brushstroke is a whisper of loss. Yet at the same time, the light that touches her face is a promise. A small, fragile promise, but enough to remind us that even in the deepest abyss, compassion can ignite like a spark. The taboo of this painting lies not in what it shows, but in what it forces us to feel. In a world that seeks visual entertainment, Cogniate leaves us with no distractions. He confronts us with pure emotion, stripped bare. That is why even today, many museum visitors confess they cannot look at it for long. The intensity of that silence is unbearable. It is as if one entered the mother's consciousness and felt her restrained breathing. In recent years, technical studies have revealed that beneath the layers of oil paint are abrupt, almost nervous strokes. The artist's hand seems to have trembled in certain areas, especially around the face. Some conservators interpret this as evidence of emotionally charged execution. Cogniate did not paint from the rational distance of a studio. He painted from a state of total empathy with his subject. He did not paint a mother. He became her. That emotional identification explains the psychological intensity of the work. Every line of the face, every shadow, every fold of the mantle seems to breathe both fear and love. The result is an image that transcends history and enters the realm of myth. The anonymous mother is the new Eve, humanity itself, fearing the loss of its seed, its descendants, its meaning. The hidden message of the painting could be summed up this way: innocence is always under threat, but it always finds refuge in love. Power destroys, but love protects. Even if the ending is uncertain, tenderness itself is an act of resistance. Cogniate does not paint the victory of evil, but the persistence of good in its most vulnerable form. Over the centuries, the massacre of the innocents has become a moral mirror. Every viewer finds something different in it. Some see a mother's pain, others humanity's helplessness, others still a wordless prayer, but all feel the same: the need to protect life, the need not to look away when innocence is hunted. Thus, what began as a biblical interpretation became a meditation on the human condition. Cogniate's art does not seek comfort, it seeks awareness. It reminds us that behind every statistic, every war, every forgotten story, there is a face, a mother, a child, a silence that cries out. And perhaps that is the deepest lesson of the painting. Silence, too, is a form of memory, because as long as there is someone capable of looking at that canvas and being moved, the innocence will never be entirely lost.